Welcome to Relative Our Family Mess. This is a dedicated space where we explore the deeper dimensions of life, focusing on true strength, timeless resilience, and the compelling stories that shape a man's journey. If you appreciate substantive, impactful content and refined perspectives, you are in the right place. Without further ado, I welcome you to today's new video. My father taught me that every watch tells two stories. The first is the time on its face. The second is the story of the hands that wound it. I have been winding the same watch every morning for 8 years. And the second story is the only one that matters to me now. The watch belonged to my daughter Caroline. It is a small thing. Silver with a white face and thin black hands. The kind a young woman picks out for herself when she is 23 and just starting to believe that her life is going to turn out exactly the way she planned. She bought it at a shop on First Avenue in Billings the spring before she met Owen. She wore it every day until the day she disappeared into Flathead Lake and did not come back. I found it on her bathroom sink 3 weeks after the accident, when Owen finally let me come over to collect a few of her things. I put it in my coat pocket, and I have never put it down since. Every morning at 5:45, I unlock the front door of Briggs and Sun Watch Repair on the corner of Main and Cascade. Flip on the overhead lights and set the kettle going on the small burner behind the counter. Then I take Caroline's watch from the shelf above the register, where I keep it next to a photograph of the two of us at Lake Flathead the summer she turned 16. And I wind it. It takes maybe 30 seconds. The mechanism is simple. An old manual movement that needs just a few turns each morning to keep running. But I do it slowly, carefully, the way my own father taught me to handle anything worth keeping. When I am finished, I set it back on the shelf and I say her name out loud. Just once. Just quietly. The way you might say, Amen, at the end of a prayer. You have been repeating so long, you no longer need to think about the words. Caroline, that is how my mornings begin. That is how they have begun for 8 years. I am 67 years old. I have run this shop for 31 of those years, the same way my father ran it before me and his father before him. The sign above the door still says Briggs and Son, even though my son turned out to be a daughter, and even though that daughter has been gone since the autumn she was 31. Caroline used to laugh about the sign. She said she was going to repaint it herself one day. Briggs
and daughter, in blue letters with a little clock in the corner. She never got around to it. I never had the heart to change it after she was gone.
The shop is small, 2 rooms with low ceilings and wooden floors that creak in the cold, which in Billings means they creak from October through April without much interruption. The front room has the counter, the display case, the register, and the shelf where I keep Caroline's watch. The back room has my workbench, my tools, my magnifying lamp, and 30 years worth of parts sorted into tiny labeled drawers that my wife Margaret organized for me the year before she passed. Margaret died 4 years before Caroline. Heart failure, the doctors said. Though I have always believed her heart was simply too large for a world that kept asking so much of it. After Margaret, it was just Caroline and me. After Caroline, It was just me. And Owen. And Lucas. Owen Marsh is my son-in-law. He and Caroline married when she was 28. A quiet ceremony at a small chapel outside of town on a Saturday in June, with maybe 40 people, and a cake that leaned slightly to the left. I did not love Owen the way a father loves the man his daughter chooses. I respected him. I believed he was good to her. I told myself that was enough. After Caroline died, Owen was all I had left of her, and Lucas, their son, was all I had left of both of them. Lucas was 3 years old when his mother disappeared. He will be 11 this December. Every year on the 1st of January, I wire $35,000 to Owen's account. I have done this without fail for 8 years. That is $280,000 in total. Money I earned fixing watches and clocks with hands that have grown stiffer every winter. Money I set aside because Caroline made me promise, before the accident, that if anything ever happened to her, I would make sure Lucas had what he needed. I kept that promise. I have never questioned it. Not once, until the Saturday morning in November, when my 8-year-old grandson sat down next to me on the bank of the Yellowstone River, looked at his fishing line floating in the cold gray water, and said something that changed everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. Every broken thing in this shop has a story. The trick is learning how to listen. The Yellowstone runs slow in November. The water is the color of old pewter, and the banks are hard with frost. And if you sit still long enough, you can hear the ice forming at the edges. A thin, crackling sound, like someone turning the pages of a book very carefully, so as not to wake anyone. I have fished this stretch of river since I was 7 years old. My father brought me here. I brought Caroline here. And now I bring Lucas. Every other Saturday, because it is the one thing Owen has never tried to take from me. Lucas was quiet that morning. Quieter than usual, which is saying something, because Lucas has always been a boy who keeps things close. He gets that from Caroline. She was the same way as a child, sitting with her thoughts the way other kids sat with toys, turning them over and over, examining them from every angle before she decided what to do with them. I used to tell Margaret that our daughter was going to be either a philosopher or a lawyer. Margaret said she was going to be both, and charged twice as much. We had been on the bank for maybe an hour, when Lucas set his fishing rod across his knees and looked at the water instead of the line. I waited. With Lucas, you always wait. Rushing him is like trying to rush a watch that is already keeping perfect time. You will only throw it off. Grandpa, he said finally. I kept my eyes on my own line. Yeah, buddy. He did not say anything for a moment. I heard him shift his weight on the log we were sitting on, heard the creak of his boots against the frost-hardened wood. I found something in Dad's drawer. He said, when I was looking for batteries for my flashlight. I looked at him then. He was staring straight ahead at the river, his jaw set in that particular way 8-year-old boys set their jaws when they are trying very hard to seem older than they are. What did you find? I asked. A photo, he said. Of a woman. I waited again. She has dark hair, he said, and she is standing by a lake. And Grandpa, he stopped, swallowed. She looks just like the pictures of Mom that Dad keeps in the box in the closet. Like, exactly like her. But she is older. And she doesn't know someone is taking the picture because she is looking the other way. The frost on the riverbank seemed to get colder. I set my own rod down very carefully. The way you set down something you are afraid of dropping. Are you sure? I asked. About the woman looking like your mom. Lucas turned to look at me then, and what I saw in his face drove the air straight out of my lungs. I have seen a lot of things in 67 years. I have seen men cry at the counter of my shop when they brought in their father's broken watches. I have seen my wife take her last breath on a Tuesday morning in our kitchen, with the coffee still brewing. I have seen a closed casket at my daughter's funeral, and felt my whole world go quiet, in a way it has never quite recovered from. But I had never seen that expression on a child's face before. It was not confusion. It was not the ordinary anxiety of a boy who had stumbled onto something he did not understand. It was fear, old and specific, and very, very real. I am sure, Grandpa, he said. And there is something else. What? He looked back at the river. Dad does not know I saw it. I put it back exactly where I found it. But Grandpa, I have seen Dad looking at his phone late at night when he thinks I'm asleep. And sometimes he talks real quiet in the garage with the door closed. And last month, a woman came to the house when Dad thought I was at Tyler's. But Tyler's mom brought me home early, and I saw her through the window before Dad saw me come in. He paused. She had dark hair, like the woman in the photo. The river moved past us, slow and gray and indifferent. Did your dad see you? I asked. No. I went around to the back door. Good, I said. That was smart. Lucas, that was very smart. He nodded, but he did not look reassured. I picked up my fishing rod and pretended to check the line. Mostly because I needed something to do with my hands. Grandpa, he said quietly. Something is wrong. I do not know what it is. But something is wrong with Dad, and I am scared, and I did not know who else to tell. I put my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me the way he used to when he was 3 years old, and Caroline had just gone. And the world had become a place that did not make sense anymore. He was 8 now, and the world still did not make sense to him, and I was furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. You did the right thing telling me, I said. You did exactly the right thing. We drove back to Owen's house in silence. Lucas held his backpack in his lap with both arms wrapped around it, like it was the only solid thing in the world. When we pulled up to the house on Rimrock Road, Owen was standing on the front steps in his jacket, checking his phone. He did not look up when we got out of the car. You are 20 minutes late, he said, still looking at the phone. Traffic on the bridge, I said. Lucas slipped past Owen and into the house without a word. Owen watched him go with the particular blankness of a man who has stopped seeing what is directly in front of him. Hey, he said, glancing at me finally. Any chance you could move up this year's payment? Got some things coming up before Christmas. I looked at him. It was November. I would not normally send the money until January. What kind of things? I asked. He shrugged. Just expenses. You know how it is. He went inside. The door closed. I stood on the sidewalk in the cold Montana air and looked up at the window of Lucas's room. The curtain moved slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a small face looking down at me before it disappeared back into the shadows. I got in my car. I sat there for a long moment with the engine running and my hands on the wheel. Then I drove straight to the shop, went to the back room, sat down at my workbench under the magnifying lamp, and picked up my phone. Ray Hutchins answered on the second ring. Ray Hutchins has been my closest friend for 34 years. We met at a church barbecue the summer he moved to Billings from Missoula. 2 weeks after I opened the shop. He was 33 then, a detective with the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office. And he had that particular quality all good detectives share, and almost nobody else does, which is the ability to make you feel like what you are saying is the most important thing he has heard all day, even when you both know it probably is not. After Margaret died, Ray and his wife Donna brought dinner to my house every Sunday for 3 months without being asked. That is the kind of man Ray Hutchins is. He retired from the force 6 years ago after 30 years of service. He still carries a small notebook in his shirt pocket. Old habits. He came through the front door at 7:30 that evening. 40 minutes after I called, I had flipped the closed sign and pulled the blinds. Ray looked around the empty shop, looked at me, and whatever he saw in my face made him reach for his notebook before he even sat down. "You look like a man who found something he was not looking for," he said, something like that. I said. He pulled up the stool behind the counter and settled onto it. "Tell me everything. Start at the beginning and do not leave anything out." So I told him. Lucas on the riverbank. The photograph in Owen's drawer. The woman with dark hair coming to the house. Owen on the front steps asking for the money early with that flat, distracted look I had been telling myself for 8 years was just grief. I told him about the curtain moving in Lucas's upstairs window as I drove away. Ray did not interrupt. He wrote in his notebook with small, careful letters. When I finished, he set his pen down. "How long has Owen been asking for the payment early?" he asked. "At least 5 years, maybe 6. Always November or December. Always some reason that sounded reasonable enough that I did not push back. And documentation receipts, anything showing where the money goes." I opened my mouth, closed it again. Ray looked at me steadily. Nothing, I said. "I sent $35,000 every January for 8 years and never once asked for a receipt because he was family, and I did not want to be the man who puts conditions on that kind of trust." Ray made a note without comment. Then he said, "Walter, what exactly are you asking me to do here? Because an 8-year-old finding a photograph of a woman who resembles his mother is not evidence of anything except that Owen might be seeing someone." "I know that," I said. But Ray, Lucas was scared. Not confused the way kids get when they find out a parent is moving on. Scared in a specific way. Like he already understood that what he found was something he was never supposed to see. Ray tapped his pen against the notebook. "Kids read rooms better than adults do. You know that, which is exactly why I called you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he flipped to a fresh page. "Tell me about the accident. Everything you remember. Every detail. even the ones that seemed ordinary at the time. I told him about October 9th, 8 years ago. Caroline had gone out to Flathead Lake alone on a Saturday afternoon. Clear sky, calm water, the kind of Montana autumn day that makes you forget what is coming. She never came home. By midnight, the sheriff had a boat on the water. By 2 in the morning, they had found her kayak overturned near the eastern shore, and one shoe caught on a root at the waterline. They never found her body. The lake is deep and cold, and does not give back everything it takes. Ray wrote steadily as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The shop ticked around us, a dozen clocks keeping their patient time. Who confirmed the identification, he asked. Owen, I said. There was not much to identify, just the kayak and the shoe, and the fact that she went out and did not come back. Ray set his pen down. He took off his reading glasses and cleaned them on his flannel shirt, which is what he does when he is thinking about something he does not yet want to say out loud. Walter, he said finally. A woman drowning alone on a calm lake on a clear afternoon tends to leave more behind than one shoe and an overturned kayak. He put his glasses back on. I want to look at the original accident report, not the summary, the full filing. Can you give me until tomorrow morning? You think something is wrong with it. He stood and tucked the notebook into his pocket. I think I want to read it before I answer that question. He moved toward the door. Get some rest tonight. The bell above the door rang once. Then the shop was quiet again. I stood behind the counter and looked at Caroline's watch on the shelf. The second hand moved in its steady circle. Counting off the seconds of a story I was only beginning to understand. I did not go home right away after Ray left. I sat in the back room of the shop for a long time at my workbench under the magnifying lamp, not working on anything, just sitting. The lamp made a small, warm circle of light on the wooden surface, and everything outside that circle was dark. I have spent a lot of my life in that circle of light. It is where I do my best thinking, and also, sometimes, my worst. It was past 9 when I finally drove home. The house on Garfield Street has been mine for 38 years. Margaret and I bought it the year after we were married, a 2-story with a covered porch and a yard big enough for a dog and a swing set, both of which we eventually got. Caroline grew up in this house. She learned to ride her bike in this driveway. She left for college from this front door with 2 suitcases and a box of books, and turned around on the porch steps to wave at us one last time, laughing, like she already knew she was going to be fine. I stood in the kitchen for a moment without turning on the overhead light. Then I went to the desk in the hallway, opened the bottom drawer, and took out the accordion file where I keep financial records. I carried it to the kitchen table and spread 8 years of bank statements across the wood under the overhead light. $35,000. January of the first year. The memo line said, "Family support." I remembered typing those words. I remembered thinking they were true. $35,000. January of the second year. Same memo. Same account number. Same silence on the other end. I went through every year. The amounts never varied. The memo never changed. What changed was everything around them. The way the statements got thicker as the years went on. The way my own account grew a little smaller each January and then recovered slowly over the months that followed. The way Owen's brief acknowledgement texts got shorter and colder until by the 6th year they had stopped entirely. In the most recent January, I had wired the money and heard nothing at all. I had told myself he was busy. I had told myself grief made people distant. I pulled out the shoebox I keep in the hall closet with correspondence and records related to Owen and Lucas. 8 years of paperwork, or what I had assumed was paperwork. What I actually found was almost nothing. No receipts. No school records for Lucas that I had not requested myself. No documentation of any kind showing where $280,000 had gone or why it was needed. I opened my laptop and pulled up Owen's bank. I did not have access to his accounts, obviously, but I could look at his social media, something I almost never did. His profile was sparse. A few photographs of Lucas from several years ago. Some posts about football. His relationship status had changed quietly 2 years back, from widowed to something that showed only a gray blank, as though he had started to fill something in and then thought better of it. I wrote everything down on a legal pad the way Ray had taught me years ago to organize information that did not yet make sense. I wrote the dates of every early payment request. November of year 2. House maintenance. December of year 3. Medical bills for Lucas that I had never seen documentation for. November of year 4. Truck repairs. The reasons were always different. The timing was always the same. Every year, like clockwork, in the last 2 months of the year. Owen needed the money before I was ready to send it. And every year I had sent it because that is what I told myself family did. I set the pen down and looked at what I had written. $280,000. Sent to a man who had never once shown me a receipt. Who had never once invited me to sit at his table for a meal. Who had never once called me just to talk about Caroline, about how much he missed her, about the small ways he saw her in Lucas every day. I thought about Lucas on the riverbank, the careful way he had placed the words, the specific quality of the fear in his eyes. I got up and walked to the living room. On the mantel above the fireplace, between a photograph of Margaret and a photograph of Caroline at her college graduation. I keep the last watch my father ever repaired. He finished it the morning he died. A pocket watch belonging to a man named Gerald Foss, who came to collect it 3 days later and wept when I told him what had happened. My father always said that a watch is just a machine for measuring what you cannot get back. Standing there in the dark living room with 8 years of bank statements on the kitchen table behind me, I finally understood what he meant. What had I been paying for? What had I actually been paying for? My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Ray. It was 11:47 at night. Found something in the accident report. It said, "You need to see this." 7 a.m. I set the phone down and stood very still in the quiet house. Ray was already at the shop when I arrived at 6:55. He was standing on the front step with 2 coffees from the diner on 2nd Avenue, a manila folder tucked under his arm, and the expression of a man who had not slept much either. I unlocked the door and we went inside without saying anything. Some mornings do not need words right away. He spread the contents of the folder across the counter while I turned on the lights. I had expected a thin file. What Ray laid out was surprisingly sparse for the kind of event that ends a life. 3 pages of official reporting, a hand-drawn diagram of the lake's eastern shoreline, and a single photograph of Caroline's overturned kayak resting in shallow water near a cluster of birch roots. That is everything I asked. That is everything in the official record, Ray said. He set his coffee down and pointed to the first page. Look at the responding officer's notes. Read the second paragraph. I leaned over the counter and read. The language was flat and procedural, the way official language always is, as though the people writing it have learned that if you drain all the feeling out of a sentence, it becomes easier to believe. Vessel recovered at approximately 0200 hours near eastern shoreline marker 11. No evidence of collision or mechanical failure. Water conditions calm at time of incident. Victim not recovered. Identification confirmed by next of kin. Identification confirmed by next of kin, I said. Ray nodded. Owen identified her. There was nothing physical to identify. No body. No personal effects beyond the shoe. Just Owen telling the responding officer that yes, his wife had gone out alone that afternoon. And yes, that was her kayak. I straightened up. That is all it took. That is all it took, Ray said. He tapped the folder. Now look at this. He slid a separate sheet across the counter, a printout with a clinic letterhead at the top. This is the dental record submission Owen provided to the sheriff's office to support the identification. Standard procedure in missing persons cases where a body is not recovered. The record was submitted 3 weeks after the incident and accepted without question. I looked at the letterhead. Cascade Valley Dental Associates. Billings, Montana. I know that clinic. I said, Caroline went there for years. Ray picked up his coffee. She did. Until it closed. He met my eyes. Cascade Valley Dental Associates closed its doors in March of the year before the accident. Lease expired. The dentist retired. The office shut down. All patient records were supposed to be transferred to a central archive managed by the Montana Dental Association. I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the November air outside. So the records Owen submitted, I said slowly, could not have come directly from that clinic, Ray said, because that clinic no longer existed when he submitted them. Someone obtained those records from the archive, or someone created documents that looked like they came from that clinic. Either way, Walter, what Owen gave to the sheriff's office was not what it appeared to be. The shop ticked around us, a dozen clocks marking time that suddenly felt very different from the time it had been yesterday. Why did nobody catch this, I asked. 8 years ago. Why did nobody check? Ray exhaled slowly. Because there was no reason to check. Owen was the grieving husband. The kayak was there. The shoe was there. The lake is deep and cold, and bodies do not always surface. It happens. The responding officers had no reason to look harder at a man who was standing in front of them crying. He paused. And there is something else. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet. A name printed at the top. Dex Pruitt. Below the name was a Billings address and a notation in Ray's handwriting listed as Sole witness. Incident report, page 2. I turned to page 2 of the accident report. There it was. A single line. Witness Dexter Pruitt confirmed subject's vehicle present at Lake Access Point from approximately 1400 hours. No other witnesses identified. One witness, I said. A man named Dex Pruitt, who saw Caroline's car at the lake. That is the entire independent confirmation. Ray folded his hands on the counter. I ran the name this morning. Dex Pruitt has a Billings address. Same zip code as Owen. He has a record. Nothing serious. A few misdemeanors from several years back. And Walter. He looked at me carefully. He and Owen Marsh went to the same high school in Laurel. They have known each other for at least 20 years. The cold in my chest settled deeper. They planned it together, I said. I do not want to say that yet. Ray said, but I want to watch Owen, starting tomorrow. I want to see where he goes, who he sees, what his routine looks like. And I want to find out who that woman in the photograph is. He closed the folder. Because right now, Walter, nothing about this adds up the way it should. I looked at the accident report lying on my counter. 3 pages, 1 shoe, 1 witness. 8 years of my life built on top of it. Monday morning in Billings, arrives quietly in November. The sky comes up gray and stays gray. The kind of flat, non-committal light that makes everything look like a photograph taken slightly out of focus. The streets are empty at 6:30, except for a few trucks headed toward the highway, and the occasional dog walker moving fast with their collar turned up against the cold. Ray and I parked 3 houses down from Owen's place on Rimrock Road at 6:45. Engine off, 2 coffees between us, and settled in to wait. Ray had done this for 30 years. He had a particular stillness about him when he was watching something, a quality of patience that went beyond mere discipline into something almost physical, like a man who had learned to make himself part of whatever background he sat against. I was less practiced. I kept shifting in my seat and checking my mirrors and wrapping both hands around my coffee cup just to have something to hold on to. Owen's house looked ordinary in the gray morning light. White siding, 2-car garage, a basketball hoop at the end of the driveway that Lucas never used because Owen never played with him. The lights in the kitchen were on. I could see movement behind the frosted glass of the front window, a shadow passing back and forth. He is up, Ray said quietly. I know, I said. We waited. At 7:50, Owen came out the front door in a jacket and work boots, a travel mug in one hand and his phone in the other. He did not look toward the street. He went straight to his truck, backed out of the driveway, and turned north on Rimrock. Ray started the engine. Here we go. We followed at a distance of 4 car lengths, which Ray said was standard for residential streets where there was not much other traffic to blend into. Owen drove north through the neighborhood, and then east on the main road, away from downtown, away from the construction management office where he supposedly worked. I noted that without saying anything, Ray noted it too. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened slightly. Owen drove for 20 minutes. The streets became less familiar as we moved toward the eastern edge of the city, past the big box stores and the auto shops and the warehouses that line the roads out toward the interstate. He turned onto a 2-lane road I did not know the name of, and Ray dropped back a little further. He is not going to work, I said. No, Ray said. He is not. Owen pulled into the parking lot of a small grocery store on the corner of a road I did not recognize, a place called Frontier Foods, with a hand-painted sign and a mostly empty parking lot. He was inside for 11 minutes. When he came out, he was carrying 2 plastic bags, the kind that stretch and swing with the weight of canned goods and packaged food, the kind you fill when you are stocking a place that does not have regular deliveries. 2 bags, Ray said. I saw. A man living alone with an 8-year-old boy does not buy groceries like that on a Monday morning, Ray said. He buys cereal and milk and maybe something for dinner. He does not buy 2 heavy bags of what looks like pantry staples, unless he is feeding someone else, I said. Unless he is feeding someone else. Ray agreed. Owen put the bags in the back seat, not the truck bed, which told me he did not want them to shift around or get cold. Then he got back in and kept driving east, away from town, toward the foothills, where the land starts to lift and the trees get thicker and the roads narrow down to single lanes running between walls of pine. Ray followed at a longer distance now, because the traffic had thinned to almost nothing, and there was nowhere to hide. The road climbed steadily for about 6 miles. The pines closed in on both sides, big old trees with their lower branches stripped by decades of winter snow, their trunks dark and straight in the gray morning light. Owen slowed and turned onto a dirt track that disappeared into the trees. There was no sign, no mailbox, nothing to indicate what the track led to. Ray pulled over immediately. Well, back from the turn. We sat and watched the dust settle where Owen's truck had been. I did not know this road existed, I said. Most people do not. Ray said. He was looking at the tree line. His hands were very still on the wheel. Walter, do you see that? I followed his gaze. Above the tree line, maybe a quarter mile into the pines, a thin column of smoke was rising in a slow, steady thread against the gray November sky. There's a cabin up there, Ray said quietly, and somebody is keeping it warm. I stared at the smoke. It rose without hurrying, patient and deliberate. The way smoke rises from a fire that has been burning for a long time. We went back that evening. Ray had spent the afternoon making calls, quietly, to people he still knew on the force, asking questions in the careful, indirect way of a man who has learned that the wrong question asked too directly can close a door that might otherwise have stayed open. He did not tell me everything he learned. He said he wanted to confirm a few things before he said them out loud. I had spent the afternoon in the shop, going through the motions of work, repairing a wall clock for Mrs. Alderman on Prospect Avenue, replacing a battery in a watch belonging to a young man who looked barely old enough to own one. My hands did the work. My mind was somewhere in the pines east of the city, watching a thin column of smoke rise against a gray sky. We left Ray's car at a pullout on the main road and walked in. Ray had a flashlight but kept it off. There was enough moonlight coming through the trees to see by, the snow on the ground picking up whatever light the sky offered and giving it back in a pale, even glow that made the forest look like something out of a dream you could not quite remember in the morning. The temperature had dropped into the low 20s. Our breath came out in small clouds that disappeared quickly in the cold, dry air. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were our boots compressing the snow and the occasional creak of a pine branch settling somewhere above us. The cabin appeared after about a quarter mile, set back from the track in a small clearing ringed by trees. It was a modest structure, one story, with a covered porch and a woodpile stacked neatly along the near wall. A single window on the front face showed a warm light, yellow and steady, the kind of light that comes from a lamp rather than a television. A thin thread of smoke rose from the chimney, barely visible against the dark sky, except where the moonlight caught it. Ray put a hand on my arm and we stopped. We stood at the edge of the tree line for a moment, watching. Nothing moved on the porch. No sound came from inside except the faint pop and settle of the fire and something else. Something so quiet that at first I thought I was imagining it. I held my breath. It was music, piano music, coming from somewhere inside the cabin, drifting out through the walls and the single-pane window with the fragile quality of something not quite meant to be heard from the outside. The melody was slow and deliberate, each note placed with care, the way a person plays when they are not performing for anyone but themselves. I stood in the snow at the edge of the pines, and I listened, and something in my chest began to come apart very slowly, the way ice comes apart in spring, not all at once but in pieces, each one breaking free with a sound too small to hear. I knew that melody. I had known it for 30 years. Clair de Lune, Claude Debussy. Caroline had learned it when she was 14 from a teacher named Mrs. Fowler, who drove out from Billings every Wednesday afternoon and sat beside her on the piano bench in our living room for an hour. It had taken Caroline 3 months to learn it properly. She played it every Christmas Eve after dinner, every year without exception, sitting at the upright piano in the living room while Margaret and I did the dishes and the house smelled of pine and candle wax. She played it the Christmas before she died. I had stood in the doorway of the living room and listened and thought, as I had thought every year, that I was the luckiest man alive. Nobody else knew that piece the way Caroline played it. Nobody else put the same slight hesitation before the third phrase, the same quiet emphasis on the left hand in the second movement, the same way of letting the last note fade until the room was not quite sure whether the music had stopped or simply become too soft to hear. I took a step toward the cabin. Ray's hand closed around my arm. "Not yet," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Walter, not yet." I stopped. The music continued, patient and unhurried, filling the cold night air between the pines. "We do this right," Ray said quietly. "We do not walk up to that door tonight. We do not knock. We do not let Owen know we have been out here. If we tip him off now, whatever is in that cabin disappears before morning, and we have nothing. Do you understand me?" I understood him. I did not move for a long moment, standing in the snow with the music wrapping around me like something I had believed was gone forever. Then I nodded. "Good," Ray said. He released my arm but stayed close. "Tomorrow we come back with the right equipment. We do this carefully. We do this once, and we do it right." We stood there together at the edge of the trees until the music stopped. Then we walked back out through the pines in silence, our boots quiet on the snow, the moonlight steady above us. I did not look back at the cabin. I did not trust myself to. I did not sleep that night. I sat in Ray's car at the pullout on the main road, with the heat running low and a blanket Ray kept in the back seat across my knees, and I watched the sky above the pines go from black to deep blue to the particular pale gray that comes just before the sun clears the mountains. At some point, Ray had gone home to get his equipment and change clothes, leaving me with the car and a thermos of coffee and instructions not to do anything until he got back. I did not do anything. I just sat and listened to the silence and thought about a 14-year-old girl learning a piece of music at an upright piano in a living room that no longer existed, and about how some things stay with a person so completely that even 8 years cannot take them away. Ray returned at 6:20 with a camera bag over one shoulder and a second thermos in his hand. He looked at me in the way a man looks at a friend who he suspects has been sitting in a cold car for 5 hours doing something that is not quite sane, but is entirely understandable. "Any movement?" he asked. "The smoke from the chimney stopped around midnight." I said, "Started again about an hour ago." He nodded and unzipped the camera bag. Inside was a camera body and a telephoto lens the length of my forearm, the kind of equipment that belonged to a man who had spent decades watching things from a distance. He assembled it with the practiced efficiency of long habit and set it on the dash, aimed toward the gap in the trees where the cabin track disappeared into the pines. "We wait for a window," he said. Literally, we did not wait long. At 7:15, a light came on in the front room of the cabin, visible as a warm rectangle through the trees. Ray raised the camera and adjusted the focus with slow, careful turns of the lens barrel. The telephoto compressed the distance until the cabin's front window filled the frame. "There," Ray said quietly. He kept shooting, the shutter clicking in a soft, rapid sequence. I watched his face instead of the camera. Ray was not a man whose expressions gave much away. 30 years of professional neutrality had seen to that. But I saw something move across his face as he looked through the viewfinder. Something careful and controlled that I recognized as the expression of a man who has just found what he was looking for and is not yet certain what to do with it. He lowered the camera slowly and opened the laptop he had brought in the second bag. He connected the camera with a cable, and the photographs appeared on the screen. A series of images taken through the window of the cabin, slightly soft at the edges from shooting through glass and distance, but clear enough. A woman standing at a counter. Dark hair pulled back. Thin in the way of someone who has not been eating well for a long time. Her face turned partially toward the window as she reached for something on the shelf above the counter. Ray opened a second window on the laptop and typed for a moment. A driver's license photograph appeared. The Montana DMV standard format. A woman in her late 20s looking directly at the camera with the slightly impatient expression people wear when they have been asked to hold still one moment too long. Dark hair. The same set of the jaw. The same particular way of holding her head slightly to the left. Ray pulled both images to the center of the screen and placed them side by side. Then he opened a program I did not recognize and ran it across both photographs. A progress bar moved slowly across the bottom of the screen. Numbers appeared. A percentage, 93, Ray said quietly. He set the laptop on the dash between us. "Walter, that is Caroline." I looked at the two photographs. The license photo from 8 years ago. Young and impatient and alive in the way that people are alive when they do not yet know what is coming. And the image from the cabin window, older, thinner, tired in a way that went beyond the physical, but the same face, unmistakably, undeniably the same face. The world I had been living in for 8 years came apart in the gray Montana morning without making any sound at all. No crash, no shattering, just a slow, quiet dissolution, the way a watch stops when the mainspring finally gives out. Not dramatically, but simply. One moment keeping time, and the next moment still. "She is alive," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, too large for the space they had to occupy. "She's been alive this whole time," Ray said. I looked at the cabin photograph again, at the thin shoulders, the dull hair, the way she moved in the small space of the cabin with the careful economy of someone who has learned not to take up too much room. "I have been sending Owen money," I said, "every January for 8 years. $280,000. "I know," Ray said. "I have been paying him to keep her there." Ray did not answer that. There was nothing to say to it that would have made it any easier to hold. Ray made me wait one more day. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than the funeral. Harder than the years of silence in the house on Garfield Street. Harder than any of it. Knowing Caroline was 200 yards into those pines, and sitting in that car, watching the smoke rise from her chimney, while Ray made calls and confirmed details, and did the careful, methodical work of a man who understood that rushing now could ruin everything. I understood it too. That did not make the waiting any easier. We went in the following morning, when Ray was certain Owen had left for wherever Owen went on Tuesday mornings. We walked the track through the pines the same way we had 2 nights before. Boots quiet on the packed snow. The trees tall and close on either side. The morning was cold and bright, the first real sunlight in days, and it came through the branches at a low angle and made long shadows across the snow that moved slightly in the wind. The cabin door was unlocked. Ray tried the handle and it opened without resistance, swinging inward on hinges that needed oil. He looked at me. I looked at the open door. Neither of us said anything. We went inside. The interior was one large room with a sleeping area at the back, divided from the rest by a curtain hung on a wire. A small wood stove against the near wall with a fire burning low. A table with 2 chairs. A kitchen counter with a hot plate, and a row of canned goods arranged with a neatness that spoke of someone who had learned to impose order on a small space, because it was the only kind of order available to them. And against the far wall, beneath the window that Ray had photographed through, an upright piano. Old, the finish worn away in places, the ivory on several keys gone yellow, but clearly played often. On the wall above the narrow bed, photographs, dozens of them, printed on plain paper and taped in careful rows. Lucas at what looked like a birthday party. Lucas in a school photograph. His hair combed flat the way boys' hair never stays combed. Lucas on a bicycle. Lucas with a gap in his front teeth, grinning at whoever was behind the camera. 8 years of a child's life, documented in photographs that someone had been keeping and sending to this place, one way or another, so that the woman living here would not forget what she was staying for. She was sitting on the bed looking at those photographs when we came in. She looked up when the door opened, and for one moment, her face did exactly what faces do when the thing they have stopped believing in walks through the door. It went completely still. Not blank. Still. The way a watch goes still when you lift it from the case and hold it level in your palm. "Dad," she said. It was barely a sound, more a shape made by her mouth than a word with any volume to it. But I heard it across the room and across 8 years, and it was the most real thing I had heard in all of that time. I crossed the room. I am not sure exactly how. I was simply on one side of it, and then I was on the other, and I had my arms around her, and she was thinner than I had understood from the photographs, thinner than anyone ought to be, her shoulders sharp under my hands, her arms, when they came up around me, feeling fragile in a way that made something in my chest clench hard and stay that way. We did not say anything for a long time. I held my daughter, and she held me. And Ray stood near the door and looked out the window at the pines and gave us whatever time we needed. When Caroline finally pulled back, she looked at my face, the way you look at something you have been trying to remember the exact details of for a very long time. Her eyes were the same. Everything else had changed. The thinness, the lines around her mouth, the particular exhausted stillness of someone who has been surviving rather than living. But her eyes were exactly the same as the eyes of the girl who had turned on the porch steps to wave at us before she left for college. "How," she said, "how did you find me?" It was not a question exactly, more an acknowledgement that the thing she had stopped allowing herself to hope for had somehow happened anyway. "Lucas," I said. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. But she did not cry. Not yet. She looked past me at Ray, who had turned from the window. "I'm Ray Hutchins," he said. "I used to be with the county sheriff's office. I am here to help you, if you will let me." Caroline looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at me. She reached out and touched my face with one hand, just briefly. The way you touch something to confirm it is real. "Does Lucas know," she asked, "that I am alive?" "No," I said, "not yet." She nodded slowly. She looked at the photographs on the wall above the bed. 8 years of her son's life pinned to a cabin wall in the pines, east of Billings. Her hand dropped back to her lap. "Then tell me what you need me to do," she said. Caroline did not begin right away. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the floor for a long moment. The way a person looks at something they have been carrying alone for so long that the act of setting it down in front of someone else feels almost physically dangerous. Ray had pulled one of the chairs from the table and sat quietly near the door. I sat in the other chair across from Caroline and waited. Outside, the pines were still in the cold, bright air. The fire in the wood stove had burned down to embers, and the cabin was cooling slowly around us, but none of us moved to add wood. Some conversations happen better in the cold. It keeps you sharp. It keeps you honest. "She started 8 years ago," she said finally. "Not the accident. Before that." I waited. "Owen had a second set of books," she said, "for his business. I found them by accident about 3 weeks before the accident, before what he made looked like an accident. He had been skimming money from the construction projects he managed. Not small amounts, significant amounts, routed through a shell company he had set up without my knowledge." She paused. "I did not understand all of it when I first found it. I am not an accountant. But I understood enough to know that what he was doing was not legal, and that people were being hurt by it. Subcontractors who were not being paid. Suppliers who were owed money. He was taking from everyone and covering it by moving the numbers around. "What did you do when you found it?" Ray asked. I confronted him. She said, "That was my mistake. I should have gone directly to someone, to the police, to a lawyer, to anyone. But I confronted him first because he was my husband. And I thought," she stopped. "I thought that there had to be an explanation. I thought I had to be misunderstanding something." She looked at her hands. There was no misunderstanding. "How did he react?" Ray asked. "He was calm," she said. "That was the thing that frightened me most. He did not get angry. He did not deny it. He just looked at me very carefully for a moment, and then he said that we needed to think about this together. That there were things I did not understand about the situation. That we should take a few days before I did anything. And I agreed, because he was calm, and I was terrified. And he had always been the person I turned to when I was terrified." She stood up from the bed and moved to the wood stove, added 2 pieces of wood from the basket beside it, and stood with her back to us for a moment, watching the embers catch. 3 weeks later, she said, "He suggested we go out on the lake, just the 2 of us, a Saturday afternoon. Lucas was with Owen's mother. He said we needed time together, that things had been tense and we needed to clear the air." She turned around. I believed him. She said it without self-pity, just as a statement of fact. The way you state a fact that no longer has the power to surprise you. I got in the kayak, and we paddled out to the eastern side of the lake, and then he told me to pull up alongside him. And when I did, he reached across and he capsized my kayak. The cabin was very quiet. "He capsized it deliberately," I said. "Deliberately and carefully," she said. "Far enough from shore that swimming back would be difficult in cold water. He had a dry bag in his own kayak with a change of clothes. Everything planned. He pulled me out of the water before I went under," she said, "which surprised me. I thought he was going to let me drown, but he did not want me dead. He wanted me controlled. He pulled me out, and he held me in the water, and he told me very quietly what was going to happen next." "What did he say?" Ray asked. "He said the Dex was waiting on shore to report the accident. He said the dental records had already been arranged. He said that, as far as anyone would ever know, Caroline Marsh had drowned in Flathead Lake on a clear October afternoon, and there was nothing left to find." She met my eyes. "He said that if I ever tried to contact anyone, if I ever tried to leave, he would tell Lucas that his mother had abandoned them, that he would make sure Lucas grew up believing I had chosen to disappear." She paused. "And then he brought me here." I looked around the cabin, at the wood stove, the hot plate, the piano, the photographs of Lucas covering the wall above the bed. "He sent you the photographs," I said. "Of Lucas?" "Every few months," she said. "That was the arrangement. I stay quiet, and he sends me photographs of my son." She looked at the wall. 8 years of photographs. 8 years of watching him grow up through printed paper taped to a wall. Ray leaned forward. "Caroline, do you know that your father has been sending Owen money every year?" She looked at me sharply. "What money?" $35,000 every January, I said. For 8 years. I thought it was for Lucas. The color left her face slowly, the way color leaves something when the light goes out behind it. He never told me, she said. He never said a single word about it. Ray's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it, and his expression changed in the small, controlled way that meant something had shifted. Owen just bought 2 plane tickets, Ray said quietly. Mexico City. Departing tomorrow evening. Ray set his phone down on the table and looked at both of us. Tomorrow evening, he said again. That means we have roughly 30 hours. After that, Owen and whoever he is taking with him are on a plane. And this becomes a federal matter with an international dimension that gets complicated very quickly. He picked up his notebook. So we need to move tonight. Caroline was still standing by the wood stove. The fire had caught properly now, and the cabin was warming again. But she did not look warm. She looked like a woman doing the arithmetic of a situation and not finding the numbers particularly encouraging. What are our options? I asked. Ray opened his notebook to a fresh page. Option 1. We go directly to the sheriff's office right now with everything we have. The photographs, the accident report discrepancies, the dental record issue, the financial records you compiled. We lay it out and let the department handle it from there. And Owen finds out within the hour, Caroline said quietly. He has someone in that office. He always has. That is how he kept the accident investigation closed 8 years ago. Ray looked at her. You know that for certain. I know Owen, she said. I was married to him for 4 years. He does not leave loose ends and he does not operate without a safety net. If there is a way for him to hear that someone is asking questions, he will have arranged it. Ray made a note. He did not argue with her. He had been a detective long enough to know that the people closest to criminals understood them in ways that official investigations often missed. Option 2, Ray said. We contact the FBI field office in Billings. Financial crimes, possible kidnapping, crossing of state lines. This goes above the local level entirely. How long does that take? I asked. To open a case and get agents in position, he tilted his head. Minimum 48 hours. Probably more. We do not have 48 hours, Caroline said. No, Ray agreed. We do not. He set his pen down. Which brings us to option 3. He looked at Caroline. I want to contact Detective Sharon Voss. She is with the Flathead County Sheriff's Office. Not Yellowstone County. No overlap with Owen's local connections. I worked with her for 6 years before she transferred north. She is careful. She is smart. And she owes me a favor I have never collected on. He paused. I want to bring her in tonight, explain the situation, and set up a controlled confrontation here at the cabin tomorrow, before Owen leaves for the airport. A controlled confrontation, Caroline repeated. You go about your normal routine, Ray said. Owen comes to the cabin tomorrow the way he always does. Except this time you are ready for him. You confront him directly about what he has done and what he is planning. And you do it wearing a recording device. The cabin was quiet for a moment. Outside, the pines moved slightly in a wind that had come up since morning. You want me to wear a wire? Caroline said. It is the only way to get a confession that will hold up, Ray said. We have circumstantial evidence, financial patterns, a falsified accident report, a discredited dental record. What we don't have is Owen admitting to any of it on record. Without that, a good defense attorney gets him out in 6 months. Caroline looked at me. I looked back at her and tried to give her the steadiest expression I had, which was not as steady as I would have liked. Ray continued. Voss will position officers outside, unmarked vehicles, plain clothes. You will not see them, but they will be 30 seconds from that door. If anything goes wrong, if Owen becomes threatening, if you feel unsafe in any way, you say a word, any word we agree on beforehand, and they come through that door immediately. What word? Caroline asked. Ray thought for a moment. Something natural. Something you might actually say in that conversation without it sounding rehearsed. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Lucas. Ray nodded. The moment we hear Lucas's name, the team moves. He wrote it down. I will call Voss now and explain the situation. If she agrees, and I believe she will, she can be here by tonight to fit the device and go over the protocol with you. Caroline looked at the photographs on the wall above the bed. 8 years of her son's face looking back at her from printed paper. Lucas at 3, at 4, at 5, at 6, growing incrementally through the years in the way children grow when you can only watch from a distance, in sudden jumps that leave you reaching for the version you last knew. I have been afraid of him for 8 years, she said. Her voice was steady and quiet, and entirely without self-pity. 8 years of being afraid of one man in this cabin, in these trees. She turned from the photographs and looked at Ray. But I am more angry than afraid now, she said. Tell me what to do, and I will do it. Ray picked up his phone and dialed. While it rang, he looked at me across the cabin with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years reading people and is not often surprised by them. I was not surprised either. She was Caroline Briggs, after all. She always had been. Detective Sharon Voss arrived at the cabin at 4:30 that afternoon in an unmarked gray truck that she parked well back from the tree line. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, compact and deliberate in the way she moved, with short gray hair and the kind of eyes that registered everything without appearing to look at anything in particular. Ray introduced her at the door, and she shook Caroline's hand, and then mine with a grip that was brief and firm and entirely professional. I have read the file Ray sent me, she said, setting a black case on the table. She looked at Caroline. I want you to know that nothing you tell me tonight leaves this room without your knowledge. You are a victim in this situation. That is how I am treating you, and that is how this investigation will treat you. Caroline nodded. Thank you, she said. It was 2 words, but she put something into them that I understood. The particular weight of a person who has not been spoken to with basic respect in a very long time. Voss opened the black case. Inside, packed in foam, was a small recording device, 2 earpieces, a handheld monitor, and several items I did not recognize. She lifted the recording device and held it up. It was smaller than I expected, flat and rectangular, about the length of a thumb. This clips to the inside of your waistband at the back, Voss said. Once it is positioned correctly, You will not feel it. The microphone picks up voice clearly within 20 feet. Battery life is 10 hours. She set it down and looked at Caroline. What are you planning to wear tomorrow? Caroline looked down at herself, at the faded jeans and the flannel shirt that had clearly been worn many times. She almost smiled, the kind of almost smile that is really just an acknowledgement of something too sad to laugh at properly. What I always wear, she said. There is not much to choose from. Voss nodded without any change of expression. She picked up the device and showed Caroline exactly where to place it and how to secure it so it would not shift. Then she had Caroline walk across the room and back while she checked the monitor. She made 2 small adjustments. Then she said, "Say something ordinary." Caroline looked at the window. Outside, the pines were dark against the pale late afternoon sky. She said, "I used to be able to see Flathead Lake from the ridge above this cabin on clear days." She paused. "I stopped going up there after the first year." Voss checked the monitor. "Perfect," she said. She set it down. "Now, tell me how Owen usually arrives." "He drives up the track," Caroline said. "He knocks twice, always twice, and then opens the door without waiting. He has a key, but he rarely uses it because the door is almost never locked." She said the last part without any particular inflection, but I heard what was underneath it. The door was never locked because there was nowhere to go. Because Owen understood that the most effective lock was not a mechanism, but a threat. "What time does he typically arrive?" Voss asked. "Afternoons," Caroline said. "Usually between 2 and 4. He does not stay long, 30 minutes at most. He brings supplies, checks that everything is in order, and leaves. Tomorrow he will come earlier," Ray said from near the door. "If he is catching an evening flight, he will want to close things out here by noon at the latest." Voss nodded. "We will be in position by 8. She looked at Caroline. "When he arrives, you do not need to force anything. You do not need to have a script. I want you to tell him that you know about the plane tickets. That is your opening. Everything else will follow from his reaction." "And if he does not react?" Caroline asked. "He will react," Voss said. "In my experience, men like Owen Marsh have spent so long believing they are the smartest person in any room that being confronted by someone they have controlled completely is genuinely disorienting to them. He will not be prepared for you to know things. He will start talking because that is what people do when the ground shifts under them, and talking feels like a way to get it back." Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And if he figures out I am wearing a device?" Voss met her eyes directly. "You say Lucas. That is all. You do not need to do anything else." Caroline absorbed that. She looked at me across the cabin. I tried to give her the same steadiness I had been trying to give her since we walked through the door, which was not much, but was everything I had. "Get some rest tonight," Voss said, closing the case. She looked at Ray. "I will confirm positions with my team at 0600. She looked back at Caroline. "Is there anything you need before tomorrow?" Caroline thought about it. She looked at the piano against the far wall, at the worn keys and the yellowed ivory. "No," she said. "I think I have everything I need." Voss and Ray went outside to coordinate the details, leaving the two of us alone in the cabin. I stayed until the fire needed tending again, and the last light left the sky above the pines. When I finally stood to go, Caroline walked me to the door. She put her arms around me briefly, and I held her carefully. The way you hold something that has been through more than it should have had to bear. "I will be right outside," I said. "The whole time, I know," she said. She stepped back. "Go get some sleep." "Dad, tomorrow we finish this." I walked out through the pines toward the road. Behind me, after a moment, I heard the piano begin. Clair de Lune, quiet and steady in the cold night air, playing itself out to the trees and the dark sky and whatever was listening. Voss had her team in position by 7:30 in the morning. I knew this because Ray told me, not because I could see them. That was the point. 3 unmarked vehicles distributed along the tree line and the main road. Plain clothes officers who looked like nothing more remarkable than people who had pulled over for reasons of their own. Ray and I were parked at the same pullout we had used for 3 days now, far enough back from the cabin track that Owen would not notice us when he turned in. Ray had the earpiece connected to Voss's frequency. I had the second one. We would hear everything Caroline's wire picked up. The morning passed slowly. A high, thin overcast had moved in overnight, and the light was flat and pale. The kind of November light that makes distances hard to judge. Ray drank coffee from the thermos and wrote in his notebook. I watched the road and tried to breathe at a normal rate, which was harder than it sounds. Owen's truck turned onto the cabin track at 10:47. Ray straightened in his seat. "Here we go," he said quietly. He reached over and turned up the volume on the receiver between us. Through the earpiece, I heard the sound of the cabin clearly, the pop of the wood stove, the faint creak of the structure in the morning wind. Then footsteps on the porch. 2 knocks. The door opening. Caroline's voice came through first. She was sitting at the table. I could picture her exactly. Hands folded, back straight, the wire hidden under her flannel shirt. "You are early," she said. Owen's footsteps crossed the floor. I heard the rustle of a bag being set down, the sound of supplies being placed on the counter, the ordinary movements of a man performing a routine he had performed many times. "Got things to take care of today," Owen said. His voice was flat and efficient, the voice of a man going through motions. "What kind of things?" Caroline asked. Owen did not answer immediately. I heard him moving around the cabin. Then he stopped. "You cut your hair," he said. There was something in his voice, not quite suspicion, but a heightened attention. The sound of a man whose instincts have just registered something slightly out of alignment. "Yesterday," Caroline said, "I needed something to do with my hands." A pause. Then Owen said, "I am going to be away for a while. I am leaving some extra supplies. There is enough here for 2 months at least." "Where are you going?" Caroline asked. "Somewhere warm," Owen said. I heard him moving toward the door. "Mexico," Caroline said. The cabin went completely silent. Not the ordinary silence of a room between sounds, but the particular silence that falls when something has shifted irrevocably, and both people in the room know it. Ray put his hand on the door handle of the car but did not open it. Not yet. Owen's voice came back slowly. What did you say? I know about the tickets, Caroline said. Her voice was steady. Entirely steady. 2 tickets. Mexico City. Tomorrow evening. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear Owen's breathing change in the way breathing changes when a person is recalibrating rapidly, running through options, measuring distances. How do you know that he said? It does not matter how I know, Caroline said. What matters is that you were going to leave without telling me. 8 years in this cabin, and you were just going to get on a plane. I heard Owen take several steps. The creak of the floor told me he had moved toward the center of the room. You have been comfortable here, he said. His voice had shifted, lost the flat efficiency and taken on something else. Something slower and more careful. You have had everything you needed. I have had 4 walls and a wood stove and photographs of my son, Caroline said. That is not everything I needed. Owen, that is the minimum required to keep a person alive. You had a choice, Owen said. You always had a choice. I gave you options. You capsized my kayak in a cold lake and told me my son would suffer if I tried to leave. Caroline said, That is not a choice. That is a threat. I heard Owen move again, closer to Caroline this time, judging by the way his voice came through the wire. You need to be very careful, he said. His voice had dropped, become quieter in a way that was not quieter at all. About what you say next, and about what you think you know. I know about Dex, Caroline said. I know about the dental records. I know about the money my father has been sending you for 8 years. Owen said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke again, the careful control in his voice had thinned to something else entirely. Your father, he said slowly. Your father has been a very useful man. Grieving fathers tend to be. They do not ask questions. They just write checks because it makes them feel like they are doing something. He paused. Does he know you are alive? He does, Caroline said. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes a decision being made. Owen pulled a chair from the table and sat down. The deliberateness of the movement came through clearly in the way the floor creaked under the chair legs. A man settling in rather than leaving. A man who had decided something. Ray's hand tightened on the door handle beside me, but he did not move. Neither did I. We listened. You want the truth, Owen said. His voice had gone entirely flat, stripped of the careful modulation he had been using since he walked through the door. All right. Let me tell you the truth. I am listening, Caroline said. I have been planning this for longer than you know, Owen said. Not just 8 years. Longer? He paused. Your father built something worth taking. That shop, the savings, the reputation. A man like Walter Briggs spends 40 years building something solid, and then he does not know what to do with it, except pass it on to people who did not build it. He looked at you as a vehicle for that, a way to keep the family name going. I was just the man who understood what that was actually worth. You married me for my father's money, Caroline said. Her voice did not waver. I married you because you were the access point, Owen said. Your father liked me. He trusted me. He would never have handed anything to a stranger, but he would hand it to the man his daughter loved. That is just how men like him work. He paused. I did not plan the rest of it. That came later. When you found the books. The rerouting scheme, Caroline said. It was not a scheme, Owen said, with the particular irritation of a man who has always believed his own intelligence exceeds other people's ability to classify it. It was a system, a careful, functional system that worked perfectly until you went through my files without asking. You were stealing from people, Caroline said. I was redistributing inefficiency, Owen said. The contractors I worked with were already cutting corners. I simply formalized the arrangement and took a reasonable percentage for the coordination. He paused. But you would not have understood that. You were going to go to someone. I could see it in your face the night you confronted me. You had already decided. So you decided first, Caroline said. Owen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, there was something almost reflective in his voice, the tone of a man reviewing a plan that had worked largely as intended and sees no particular reason not to discuss it. Dex had worked a water rescue operation on Flathead 2 years before, Owen said. He knew the lake, the currents, the reporting procedures. We had 3 weeks to plan it. The dental records were the hardest part. Getting access to the archive, substituting documentation that would pass a basic check without being subjected to a forensic review. Dex knew someone. He usually does. Walter heard what was happening clearly through the earpiece. Every word landing with the weight of something that has been true for a long time and is only now being said out loud. I gripped the door handle of Ray's car and held on. And the cabin, Caroline said. Whose idea was the cabin? Mine, Owen said. I needed you somewhere close enough to manage, but far enough that no one would look. The property belongs to a holding company Dex set up years ago. Nothing connects it to me on paper. He paused. I told you it was temporary. I meant that. In the beginning. I thought 6 months, maybe a year, until the investigation closed and the insurance paid out, and your father's annual payments established themselves as routine. But you kept extending it, Caroline said. You were safer here, Owen said, and your father kept sending the money without question. There was no reason to change the arrangement. He paused again. Until now. Why now? Caroline asked. Because the business is finished, Owen said. The system I built is done. I have what I need from it, and I am not going to wait around for someone to start looking at the numbers more carefully than they have been. He stood. The chair scraped back. His voice was closer to the wire now. Mexico is the end of this. A clean end. I have earned that. What about Lucas? Caroline said. Owen was quiet for a moment. What about him? He is your son. He is a child, Owen said. He will be fine. Your father will take care of him. That is what your father does. He takes care of things and does not ask enough questions. He paused. You should have been more like him. Caroline. It would have been easier for everyone. Caroline said, I have one question. Owen waited. Did you ever? She said, and her voice stayed level and clear and entirely without trembling. Did you ever once think about what this did to my father? What it cost him? 8 years of believing his daughter was gone. Owen considered this with what sounded like genuine reflection. He was useful. Owen said, "Grief made him useful. If he had been less devoted to you, he would have been harder to manage." He paused. "I did not make him grieve. I just did not stop it." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them without meaning to. The way you count things when your hands are shaking and you need something to hold on to. Then Caroline said, clearly and without hesitation, "I think you should know that Lucas is aware his mother is alive." Every unit outside that cabin heard the safe word at the same moment. So did I. I was out of the car before Ray could say anything at all. The snow between the pullout and the cabin track was deeper than it looked. I found that out immediately, my boots breaking through the crust with every step, each stride costing more than it should have for a 67-year-old man who had not run anywhere in years. I ran anyway. Behind me, I heard Ray calling my name, and then I heard the sound of engines starting all along the tree line, the unmarked vehicles coming alive at once, headlights cutting through the flat November morning. I heard Voss's voice in the earpiece. "All units move in. All units move now." The cabin track was 50 yards from the pullout. It felt like 500. The pines on either side blurred past me as I ran, the cold air burning in my chest, my boots loud on the packed snow of the track. Ahead of me through the trees, I could see the cabin, the front window lit from inside. And as I watched, the door burst open and Owen came out at a full run. He did not run toward me. He ran left, into the trees, toward the ridge that rose behind the cabin, moving with the specific urgency of a man who has thought about this possibility and has a direction prepared. He hit the tree line and disappeared into the pines before the first police vehicle had even reached the cabin clearing. 2 officers went after him immediately, breaking into the trees without hesitation, their radio communications crackling through the earpiece in short, clipped bursts. Voss was out of her vehicle and at the cabin door before I reached the clearing. I heard her announce herself inside, heard the professional calm of her voice, heard nothing that sounded like a struggle. I reached the cabin porch, breathing harder than I had any right to, and pushed through the open door. Caroline was standing in the center of the room. She had not moved from where she had been sitting. She was still at the table, hands folded in front of her, and she looked up when I came in with an expression that I will not try to describe because I do not have the right words for it. Relief was part of it. Exhaustion was part of it. And something else. Something that I recognized after a moment as the particular quality of a person who has just done something very hard and is only now beginning to understand that it is over. Voss was already on her radio, coordinating with the officers in the trees. A second team had broken off toward the main road to cover the ridge exit. The cabin was suddenly full of people and equipment, and the efficient noise of a professional operation doing exactly what it had been designed to do. And in the middle of all of it, Caroline sat at her table, and I stood in the doorway, and for a moment it was just the 2 of us looking at each other across a room that had been her whole world for 8 years. I crossed to her. I put my hands on her shoulders, and she reached up and covered them with hers, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say that the silence did not already contain. Voss appeared at my shoulder. "He's in the trees," she said. "We have 2 officers on, and he has nowhere to go. The ridge dead ends at a rock face about a 1/4 mile in." She looked at Caroline. "You did exactly right. Every word of that recording is clean and admissible." Caroline nodded. She was still holding my hands on her shoulders. Dex Pruitt, Ray asked from the doorway. He had come in behind me, slightly less out of breath than I was, which said something about the difference 30 years of active service made on a man's lungs. Second team picked him up at his residence 20 minutes ago, Voss said. He was home. He looked at Caroline. Both of them are in custody before noon. She paused. Miss Briggs, I need you to come with me in about 10 minutes to give an initial statement. It does not have to be long. We have the recording, but it helps to have your account on record today. I understand, Caroline said. She stood up from the table slowly, the way a person stands when they have been sitting in the same place for a very long time, and their body has to remember how to do it. She looked around the cabin once, a long, careful look that took in the wood stove and the hot plate, and the photographs of Lucas on the wall, and the piano against the far wall with its worn keys and yellowed ivory. She looked at all of it, the way you look at something you are seeing for the last time and want to remember accurately. Then she looked at me. I am not coming back here, she said. I am never coming back here. No, I said. You are not. From outside, through the trees. We heard a shout and then the sound of radio communication in rapid sequence. And then Voss's radio crackled with a single clear transmission. Subject in custody. Repeat. Subject in custody. Owen Marsh, 8 years after he had stood on the shore of Flathead Lake and watched his plan go into motion, was face down in the snow somewhere in the pines, east of Billings, with his hands behind his back. Caroline stood in the center of the cabin and listened to that transmission with her eyes closed and her hands at her sides. Then she walked to the door and out onto the porch and stood in the cold November air for the first time, without anyone telling her she could. We stood on the porch together for a long time, Caroline and I, while the police vehicles moved through the clearing and the officers went about the organized work of securing a scene. The cold was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that clarifies things, that strips away everything that is not essential and leaves only what is actually true. Caroline had her arms wrapped around herself, not against the cold, I did not think, but in the way of a person who is checking that they are still intact, that the boundaries of themselves are still where they expect them to be. After a while, I put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me, the way she had leaned into me inside the cabin. Carefully, like someone learning to trust weight again. Voss came out onto the porch and stood with us for a moment without speaking. She had the particular quality of a good officer in the aftermath of an operation, present, but not intrusive, attending to what was needed, without filling the space with unnecessary sound. After a moment, she said, quietly, the recording is everything we need. Clear audio, full confession, no ambiguity. Both subjects are in custody. This is going to hold. Caroline nodded without turning around. I want you to know, Voss continued, that as far as this investigation is concerned, you are a victim of a sustained criminal conspiracy. False imprisonment. Fraud. Identity fraud. Financial exploitation through a third party. She paused. You are not going to face any charges. There is nothing in your history that creates legal exposure for you. You have been the victim here from the beginning. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I confronted him without telling anyone. 8 years ago. I found what he was doing, and I went directly to him instead of going to the authorities. If I had done the right thing, then none of this would have happened. You were 29 years old and you trusted your husband. Voss said. That is not a crime. That is just being human. She looked at her evenly. Do not spend the next 8 years punishing yourself for what Owen Marsh did. He made choices. You survived them. Those are two different things. Caroline absorbed that. The pines around the clearing stood tall and still in the cold air, the same pines that had surrounded her for 8 years. And I watched her look at them and saw something change in her face. Something subtle and significant. The way a landscape changes when the light shifts. The same elements rearranging themselves into something that looks entirely different from what it was a moment before. Ray appeared at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at us with the expression of a man who has done what he came to do and is quietly satisfied by how it turned out. He did not say anything elaborate. That was not Ray's way. You did good, he said to Caroline. You did real good. She looked down at him. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. Not yet. Thank you, she said. Both of you. She looked at me. 8 years, and you still came. I told you I would. I said. The words came out rough around the edges because my throat was doing something I was trying not to pay attention to. You just did not know I was telling you. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. Voss stepped back inside to coordinate with her team, leaving the 3 of us on the porch in the afternoon light. The sun had broken through the overcast in the last hour, and it came at a low angle through the trees, the way November sun does in Montana, close to the horizon even at midday, throwing long shadows across the snow that made everything look further away than it was. Caroline looked up at the sky above the pines. It was the particular blue of a late autumn afternoon, deep and clear, the kind of blue that only comes after a long stretch of gray, and that you cannot look at without feeling something loosen in your chest. I had forgotten what the sky looked like, she said. From outside. I could see it through but it is different from outside. I know, I said, though I did not know. Not really. I had never had the sky taken from me. But I understood what she meant by different. She looked at me then, a long, direct look. Dad, she said. Does Lucas know yet? No, I said. Not yet. Tomorrow. She nodded slowly. She turned back to the sky. A hawk was moving somewhere high above the clearing, riding a thermal in long, patient circles, the way hawks do when there is no urgency, when the air itself is enough. Tomorrow, she said quietly, as though she was testing the word, learning how it felt to say something about the future again. Tomorrow, I confirmed. Ray drove us both out through the pines as the afternoon light faded. Caroline sat in the back seat and looked out the window the entire way, watching the trees go past, watching the road open up as we left the forest and reached the main highway, watching the city of Billings come into view in the distance, with its familiar skyline and its ordinary lights coming on one by one in the early dark. She did not say anything for a long time. Then, just before we reached town, she said, I want to see the shop. We drove past Briggs and Son on the way home. I had left the light on in the front window, the way I always did. Caroline pressed her hand flat against the cold glass of the car window when we passed it, just for a moment, and then lowered it back to her lap. We arrived at the house on Rimrock Road at 8:15 the following morning. Caroline had stayed the night at my house on Garfield Street, in her old room, which I had kept the same way I had kept everything else that belonged to her, not out of any deliberate decision, but simply because changing it had never felt like something I was ready to do. She had stood in the doorway of that room for a long time the night before, without going in, just looking at the bookshelf and the desk and the small framed photograph of her and Margaret at Lake Flathead that sat on the windowsill. And I had stood behind her in the hallway and let her look for as long as she needed. She had slept. I had heard her breathing slow and steady through the wall some time after midnight, and I had lain awake in my own room and listened to it the way you listen to a sound you were certain you would never hear again. Carefully, without moving, as though any disturbance might cause it to stop. In the morning, she came downstairs in clean clothes I had found in the closet, a little large on her now, and sat at the kitchen table while I made coffee, and neither of us talked very much. There was not a lot that needed saying yet. The large things were true, and the small things could wait. We drove to Rimrock Road in my truck. Caroline sat in the passenger seat and watched the streets of Billings go past with the expression of a person reading a book they had memorized long ago and are now checking for changes. Some things were different. Most things were the same. That seemed to comfort her in a way I had not expected. I parked in front of the house. Owen's truck was gone, which it would be for a long time. The house looked ordinary in the morning light. White siding, basketball hoop, the lawn past needing attention. The kind of house that holds its secrets behind perfectly normal exteriors. Caroline looked at it from the passenger seat. She had not spoken since we turned onto Rimrock Road. "Are you ready?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have been waiting 8 years to be ready for this. I do not think ready is the right word. I think the right word is necessary." I got out and went to the front door. Caroline stayed by the truck. We had talked about this the night before, about how to do it, about what Lucas needed first and what could come after. He needed to see my face first, a face he knew, before he saw anything that would require him to reorganize his entire understanding of his own life. I knocked. 30 seconds passed. Then the door opened, and Lucas stood in the frame in his school's clothes, backpack on, ready for a day that was not going to go the way he had planned. "Grandpa." He looked past me at the truck, then back at my face. His eyes were quick and alert, the eyes of a child who has learned to read rooms and situations before committing to any particular response. "Is something wrong?" I crouched down so I was at his level. "Something like that," I said. "But the right kind of wrong, the kind that fixes things instead of breaking them." I looked at him steadily. "Lucas, I need you to be very brave right now. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a moment. He was 8 years old, and he had been reading situations his whole life, and I could see him reading this one, taking in my expression, and the truck parked at the curb, and whatever quality the morning had that was different from other mornings. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I can do that." I stood up and stepped to the side. Caroline had come up the front walk while I was talking to Lucas. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, 3 feet away, close enough that there was no possibility of mistake, and far enough that he had room. She was wearing Margaret's old blue sweater, and her hair was brushed, and she was looking at her son with an expression that I do not have the language to describe, and will not try to. Lucas looked at her. His backpack slid off one shoulder, and he caught it automatically without looking at it, his eyes fixed on the woman at the bottom of the steps. The recognition did not come all at once. It came in stages, the way recognition of something you believed was impossible tends to come. First as a question, then as a possibility, then as something the body understands before the mind has finished its argument. His chin moved first, then his eyes changed. "Mom," the word came out barely above a whisper. Caroline nodded. She did not trust herself to speak yet. I could see that clearly. Lucas came down the porch steps. He did not run, which surprised me. He walked. Carefully. The way you walk towards something you are afraid will disappear if you move too fast. He stopped in front of Caroline and looked up at her face, and she looked down at his. And then he put his arms around her waist and pressed his face against her shoulder, and she folded both arms around him and held on. Neither of them said anything for a long time. I stood on the porch above them and looked at the ordinary street and the ordinary morning sky and the leaves still clinging to the trees along Rimrock Road. And I thought about Margaret, about how she would have handled this moment with exactly the right words and exactly the right silence. And I was glad she was somewhere that she could see it, even if I could not tell her about it later. Eventually, Lucas pulled back enough to look up at Caroline's face. His eyes were red, and so were hers. I knew something was wrong. He said, "I told Grandpa." "I know you did," Caroline said. Her voice was rough but steady. "You did exactly the right thing." He nodded seriously. Then he said, "Are you staying?" Carolyn looked at me over the top of his head. Then she looked back down at her son. "Yes," she said. "I am staying." The federal courthouse in Billings sits on the corner of 2nd Avenue North and North 27th Street. A stone building with high ceilings and wide corridors that echo with every footstep. I had driven past it hundreds of times over the years. On the morning of March 11th, I parked in the north lot and sat in my truck for a moment before going in. I was wearing the suit I had bought 8 years ago for Caroline's funeral. It was the only suit I owned. I had not worn it since the day of the service. It seemed right to wear it today. It seemed like a way of saying to whoever was listening that the occasion which had called for this suit had turned out to be something other than what it appeared to be, and that I was here to correct the record. Caroline was already inside when I arrived, sitting in the corridor with Voss and the prosecuting attorney, a methodical woman named Patricia Hale, who had spent 3 months building what she described, without apparent emotion, as an airtight case. Lucas was at school. We had decided together that a federal courtroom was not a place for an 8-year-old boy. What Lucas needed right now was the ordinary continuity of his days. The school bus and the spelling tests, and the lunch table where he sat with his friends. Caroline looked up when I came down the corridor. She was wearing a dark blue dress she had chosen herself. The first piece of clothing she had bought with her own money since leaving the cabin. She wore it with the quiet self-possession of a woman who has decided she is done being made small. She looked like her mother. She had always looked like her mother, but it was clearer now. Ray was already in the gallery when we took our seats. He gave me a brief nod. That was enough. Owen sat at the defense table in a gray suit his attorney had chosen for him. He did not look at Caroline when she entered. He stared at the table in front of him with the composure of a man who has decided that composure is the last asset he possesses. Dex Pruitt sat at a separate table beside a younger attorney who looked as though he had drawn an assignment he had not expected. Patricia Hale presented the case over 4 days. She played the wire recording on the 2nd day. Owen's voice filled the courtroom, flat and certain and entirely without remorse. I watched the jury listen and watched their faces change in the small ways. Faces change when confirmation arrives for something already suspected. I testified on the 3rd day. I told the jury about 8 years of January wire transfers, about $280,000 sent without question, about an urn on my mantel that I had believed held my daughter's ashes. Patricia Hale entered the urn into evidence. It sat on the exhibit table throughout my testimony, small and brass and ordinary. The most dishonest object I have ever been in a room with. The defense suggested I had been negligent. Patricia Hale addressed this in redirect with a single question. She asked why I had trusted Owen Marsh without reservation for 8 years. Because he was my daughter's husband, I said. And my daughter was gone, and he was all I had left of her. The jury understood that. Caroline testified on the 4th day. She spoke for 2 hours without her voice wavering once. She did not perform her grief. She simply told the truth, which was more than sufficient. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the afternoon of March 14th, the foreperson stood and read the verdict. Owen Marsh, guilty on all counts. Dex Pruitt, guilty on all counts. The courtroom did not erupt the way courtrooms do in films. It was quieter than that. A collective exhale, the sound of a room releasing something it had been holding for a long time. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Owen received 18 years. Dex received 7. Full restitution ordered for both. I walked out of the courthouse into the April sun with Caroline beside me and Ray 1 step behind. Voss shook our hands on the steps and left. Patricia Hale did the same. Ray stopped and looked at the ordinary Billings afternoon, going about its business around us. What now, he said. I looked at Caroline. She was standing in the sunlight with her face turned slightly upward, letting something warm reach her after a long time in the cold. Now we go home, I said. 3 months after the sentencing, on a Tuesday morning in July, I arrived at the shop at 5:50 to find Caroline already there. She was standing at the front door with 2 coffees from the diner on 2nd Avenue, her key in her hand. Wearing the canvas apron I kept on the hook inside. She had taken it home at some point and washed it. It was clean in a way it had not been since Margaret used to launder it every Sunday without being asked. You are early, I said. She handed me one of the coffees. I wanted to open up, she said. Is that all right? More than all right, I said. We went inside together. The shop was quiet the way it is always quiet at that hour, the clocks ticking in their various rhythms, the display case catching the first thin light through the front window. Caroline walked slowly down the length of the counter, trailing one hand along the glass, looking at the watches the way a person looks at something known in a different life and being relearned in this one. She stopped at the shelf above the register. Her watch was there, the silver one with the white face and the thin black hands, beside the photograph of the 2 of us at Flathead Lake, the summer she turned 16. You kept winding it, she said. Every morning, I said. 5:45. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached up and took it from the shelf and turned it over in her hands. She fastened it around her left wrist and held her arm up and looked at it without saying anything. Something moved across her face that I did not try to name. Show me how to do the books, she said. So I showed her. The leather ledger in the drawer beneath the register. Every transaction recorded by hand in the columns my father had taught me when I was 12. Caroline sat on the stool beside me and followed along with the focused attention of someone learning something they intend to keep. She asked good questions. She found an error in the previous month's column within 20 minutes that I had missed entirely. You always were better at numbers than me, I said. Mom was better than both of us, she said. She said it lightly, the way you say something about a person who is gone when you have reached the place where saying it brings more comfort than pain. Lucas came in after school at 3:15. He dropped his backpack behind the counter in the spot that had become his spot and climbed onto the stool next to Caroline and studied what she was working on. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Inventory," Caroline said. She slid the ledger toward him. "See these numbers? Each one is a watch that came in for repair. When it goes out fixed, I put a check mark." Lucas studied the page. "Why does that one not have a check mark?" "Because your grandfather has not fixed it yet," Caroline said. She looked at me. "It is a pocket watch from 1941. I said. "The mainspring is original. I am being careful." Lucas nodded, accepting this. Then he said, "Grandpa, can I try?" I had been waiting for him to ask. I had set aside a simple movement on my bench specifically for this moment. Old but forgiving of an inexperienced hand. I brought it out and set it under the magnifying lamp and pulled the spare stool around and began showing Lucas the same things my father had shown me in this same room 60 years ago. How to hold the movement, how to identify the components, how to look at something broken and understand what it needs. Caroline watched from behind the counter without speaking. After a while, she went back to the ledger. The shop filled with the sounds of the afternoon, clocks ticking, pen on paper, the small, precise work of careful hands. At 4:30, Lucas looked up and held the movement under the lamp and squinted at it with one eye closed. "Grandpa," he said, "whose watch is this?" He pointed at Caroline's wrist. I looked at Caroline. She unclipped the watch and held it out across the counter. "It was mine," she said. "A long time ago." She paused. "Now it is yours, if you want it." Lucas took it carefully in both hands. He turned it over, learning its weight, the way Caroline had turned it over that morning, the way I had turned it over 10,000 times before that. He looked at the white face and the thin black hands. "I will keep it wound," he said. "Every morning." Caroline looked at me over the top of his head. Her eyes were bright and she was smiling, the kind of smile that reaches all the way up. 5:45, I told Lucas, not a minute later. He nodded seriously and fastened the watch around his own small wrist and turned back to the movement under the lamp. The afternoon light came through the front window and lay in long, warm rectangles across the wooden floor. The clocks ticked. Outside on Main Street, the city went about its business. I stood behind the counter of my father's shop with my daughter, beside me and my grandson at the bench, and understood, for the first time in a very long time, that this was enough. That ordinary, when you have lost it and found it again, is the most extraordinary thing there is. The summer came late to Montana that year, holding back through most of June before arriving all at once in early July, with the generosity of something that knows it has kept you waiting. The mountains turned green, and the sky went the deep blue that only comes at altitude, and Flathead Lake. which had been many things to me over the course of my life, became something new. We drove up on a Saturday morning, the three of us in my truck. Lucas sat in the back with his fishing rod in pieces beside him. Caroline rode with her window down and her arm resting on the door, the way she used to ride when she was 16, and the summer felt endless. The drive takes about 3 hours through country that gets more beautiful the further north you go. The plains giving way to foothills, and the foothills giving way to the Mission Mountains, standing white against the sky. Lucas talked most of the way. He had developed opinions about fishing over the past months with the thoroughness of a boy who approaches new subjects completely and without rushing. He had questions about lures and water temperature, and the feeding habits of West Slope cutthroat trout. Caroline listened from the passenger seat with the expression of a person storing things up, accumulating small, ordinary moments, the way you accumulate something you were told you would never have. We put the boat in at the public launch on the eastern shore. The lake was calm and very blue. The far mountains reflected in the water so clearly it looked like the sky went down as well as up. Lucas stood on the dock with his hands on his hips. "It is really big," he said. "It is," I agreed. "Mom," he said, turning to Caroline. "Did you come here when you were little?" "Every summer," she said. "Your grandfather taught me to fish right here." She paused. "I caught my first fish about 50 yards out from this dock." "What kind?" Lucas asked. "Cutthroat," she said. "About this big." She held her hands apart. Lucas studied the gap with the critical eye of a fisherman evaluating a claim. "That is pretty good," he said. "It was enormous," Caroline said. "Your grandfather will confirm it." "It was a respectable fish," I said. "We went out in the early morning when the water was still, and the light was just coming over the eastern hills." Lucas sat in the bow with his rod and his serious fisherman's focus. Caroline sat amidships with her face turned toward the sun. I sat in the stern with the motor at idle and watched them both, and did not say anything because nothing needed saying. The fish were slow that morning. Lucas bore this with patience, checked his lure twice, adjusted his technique, and settled back in to wait. At 10:15, his rod bent hard and fast. He grabbed it with both hands and held on with the whole body effort of a boy fighting his first real fish. Caroline set her own rod down and leaned forward with both hands on the gunnel. "Hold on," I told him. "Let him run. Do not force it." Lucas held on. The fish ran and he let it run and then worked it back steadily, his tongue between his teeth. It took 4 minutes. When he finally brought it alongside the boat, we looked down together at a West Slope cutthroat, maybe 14 inches. Bright and wild in the clear water. Lucas looked up. His face was flushed and his hair was everywhere, and he was grinning in a way I had not seen before. A grin that started somewhere deep and came all the way out. "Can we come back?" he asked. "Every summer." I looked at Caroline. She was watching her son with wet eyes, and that same grin from the same place. And I understood I was looking at something interrupted for 8 years that was only now finding its way back to where it had always been going. "Every summer," I said. "That is a promise." We released the fish and watched it go, back down into the blue water. Lucas watched until it disappeared. Then he picked up his rod and settled back into his patience. I let the boat drift. The mountains stood around the lake the way they always had. In the water below, I could see the three of us reflected. Grandfather and mother and son, floating above our own upside-down faces in the summer light. I looked at that reflection for a long moment. Then I looked up at Caroline and found her already looking at me. She nodded once, the way she used to when she was a girl, and I had said something she did not need me to repeat. "I know, Dad," she said quietly. "Every broken thing can be fixed. My father told me that. He was a watchmaker who spent his life proving it true. And I have spent mine learning that he was right, that it applies to more than movements and mainsprings and the small, precise mechanisms of clocks. It applies to families. It applies to the years you thought were lost. It applies to the people you loved and believed were gone, and found again in the place where you least expected to look. If this story reached you in some way, I would be glad to know. Leave a comment below and tell me what it brought to mind. If it is the kind of story you think someone else needs to hear, pass it along. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, the subscribe button is right there. I would be honored to have you stay. The sun moved across the sky, and the lake stayed calm, and somewhere back in Billings, the clocks in my shop kept their patient time. Every broken thing can be fixed. You just need the right hands and enough time.